Okay, I'm getting back into my replies to the CES letter. It's been a while since I've done one of these. Before I get into it though, let me reiterate that this is my own personal views based on what I have read in the scriptures and other church publications and the words of the prophets. I do not represent the church itself, nor its leadership. It is just my own personal opinions on the subject. Having said that, we are still in the first section titled Book of Mormon. This is issue number 6, titled Archaeology. This is an extremely long section, and so as I usually do, I will read the entire issue as they have it in the letter before I address it. However, because of its length, I will be reading rather fast. Hopefully you can catch up, but I will touch on all the important parts afterwards in my response. So, here we go. Archaeology. There is absolutely no archaeological evidence to directly support the Book of Mormon or the Nephites and Lamanites, who are supposed to have numbered in the millions. This is one of the reasons why unofficial apologists have developed the limited geography model, meaning it happened in Central or South America, and claim that the Hill Cumorah mentioned as the final battle of the Nephites is not in Palmyra, New York, but is elsewhere. This is in direct contradiction to what Joseph Smith and other prophets have taught. It also makes little sense in light of the church's visitor center near the Hill Cumorah in New York and the annual church-sponsored Hill Cumorah pageants. We read about 2 major war battles that took place at the Hill Cumorah, or called Ramah to the Jaredites, with deaths numbering in the tens of thousands. The last battle between the Lamanites and Nephites around 400 AD claimed at least 230,000 deaths on the Nephite side alone. No bones, hair, chariot, swords, armor, or any other evidence of a battle whatsoever has been found at this site. John E. Clark, director of BYU's Archaeological Organization, wrote in the Journal of Book of Mormon Studies, "In accord with these general observations about New York and Pennsylvania, we come to our principal object, the Hill Cumorah. Archaeologically speaking, it is a clean hill, no artifacts, no walls, no trenches, no arrowheads. The area immediately surrounding the hill is similarly clean. Pre-Columbian people did not settle or build here. This is not the place of Mormon's last stand. We must look elsewhere for that hill." Compare this with the archaeological evidence of other hillside battle sites. Carrow Hill Fort, however you pronounce that, in the Wales capital of Cardiff, was found to have abundant archaeological evidence of inhabitants and weapons of war dating as far back as 3600 BC in the form of stone arrowheads, tools, and pottery. Compare the absent evidence of Book of Mormon civilizations to the archaeological remnants of other past civilizations, such as the Roman occupation of Britain and other countries. There are abundant evidences of their presence during the first 400 years AD, such as villas, mosaic floors, public baths, armor, weapons, writings, art, pottery, and so on. Even the major road systems used today in some of these occupied countries were built by the Romans. Additionally, there is ample evidence of the Mayan and Aztec civilizations, as well as a civilization in current-day Texas that dates back to at least 15,000 years. Another recent discovery has been made of a 14,000-year-old village in Canada. Admittedly, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, but where are the Nephite or Lamanite buildings, roads, armor, swords, pottery, art, etc.? How can these great civilizations just vanish without a trace? Latter-day St. Thomas Stewart Ferguson was the founder of the BYU Archaeological Division, known as New World Archaeological Foundation. NWAF was financed by the LDS Church. The foundation and Ferguson were tasked by BYU and the church in the 1950s and 1960s to find archaeological evidence to support the Book of Mormon. After 17 years of diligent effort, this is what Ferguson wrote in a February 20th, 1976 letter about trying to dig up evidence for the Book of Mormon. You can't set Book of Mormon geography down anywhere because it is fictional and will never meet the requirements of the dirt archaeology. I should say, what is in the ground will never conform to what is in the book. And that is the issue as they state it. Okay, so that is the issue that they raise. I'm going to make 3 main points here. I do apologize if I ramble. I had some notes, but they were too long, so I decided to kind of wing it and just make 3 basic notes on this point. The first is at the beginning they try to kind of preemptively prevent people from arguing against them with their mention of the limited geography model, as they call it. This is the idea that everything in the Book of Mormon happened in a very limited area, usually said to be somewhere in Central America, though South America is also posited. And some people even say it is in North America, although that's much less common. They bring it up mainly for the point of saying, this argument isn't going to satisfy us, so don't bring it up. And I just want to say on this point, I agree with them. The limited geography model, in my opinion, does not fit the text of the Book of Mormon, and therefore I reject the idea. The prophets do state that the hill in western New York is the Hill Cumorah of the Book of Mormon, and that is enough for me. As a side to this point, they quote a John E. Clark, who is the director of BYU's archaeological organization, where he says that the Hill Cumorah is a clean hill, and therefore, archaeologically speaking, can't be the hill of the Book of Mormon. However, the historical record does not agree with Brother Clark. Now, before I go on, I do want to say, John E. Clark, he is a member of the church in good standing, and he professes a strong testimony in both the Gospel and the Book of Mormon. But he does not believe that it took place in New York in any way. His credentials on this, he even states in the article that is cited, that he is not an expert on the area and that he only took a few hours to glance over the relevant literature, meaning probably a half a dozen or so of the more prominent papers on the subject. There is, in the historical record, evidence that this is not the case, that Cumorah was not a clean hill. We can find many such quotes. They have been compiled on a website called called Book of Mormon Evidence, which I will link to in the description. And just to give an example of these quotes, I like this one. It says, in the towns of Bloomfield, Victor, Manchester, and in the regions round about, there were hills upon the tops of which were entrenchments and fortifications, and in them were human bones, axes, tomahawks, points of arrows, beads, and pipes, which were frequently found. The Hill Cumorah is a high hill for that country, and had the appearance of a fortification or entrenchment around it. In the state of New York, probably there are hundreds of these fortifications which are now visible. This is a quote from Heber C. Kimball, compiled in the, or quoted in the book Mounds at Cumorah, written by Orson F. Whitney. Heber C. Kimball lived in the 1830s. He was there in Kirtland. He visited the area of New York and the Hill Cumorah. He is an eyewitness, and he is stating that they found many things, not just on Cumorah itself, but on all the area around it. Yet in the modern day, people will say there's nothing there. And on this website, there are many other quotes from people, both members of the church and non-members, stating that they have found many different artifacts and things of that nature around the hill. So it was not a clean hill. It might be today, because maybe everything was already found, shipped off, packed away, whatever. But the historical record tells us that it was not a clean hill, that many things were found, and so to claim that it is a clean hill is to ignore the historical evidence. But that brings me to my second point, which is that archaeology is not history. Archaeology is actually a very imprecise field of study, a very imprecise discipline, because all it can really tell us is that something existed at some time in the past. Everything else is conjecture and speculation. History, on the other hand, is the written record. It is the testimony of those who lived at the time telling us what happened and how. If you're just looking at archaeology, you can never have a truly accurate understanding of what happened. And to illustrate this, a man named David McCulley wrote a book titled Motel of Mysteries, in which he basically made fun of archaeologists. And I will show you this first image here. This is what he titles a detailed sketch of the first chamber of the tomb. Now, what you got to understand is his book, Motel of Mysteries, is supposedly a future archaeologist, some 2,000 years in the future, digging up the ruins of a motel and describing his wondrous finds and the wonderful discoveries that he has made. And if you look at this image, I mean, we recognize this as a guy, you know, the skeleton's laying in a bed in a motel room. He's got a TV, got a few beer bottles on the floor. But in his description in the book, he describes the TV as a great altar. The beer bottles are the sacred burial jars. But then he goes into the second chamber of the tomb. And this is this image. And he describes the second body being in a pristine white coffin, wearing the ceremonial funeral headdress. Talking, of course, about the shower cap and the bathtub. He describes the toilet as being the sacred urn with a music box, or, you know, the water tank on the back. The bar of soap and the bottle of shampoo are referenced as the chemicals used in preparing the body for burial. And so, he very cleverly and rather humorously points out the inherent difficulties of archaeology. Another good thing here is, I'll show you this one. This was claimed to be a find of a crown. And archaeology went crazy over this great find of this crown. Come to find out later on that it was really just the metal brace for a water bucket. So it shows you how archaeology can get things so wrong. History is written. I'm not saying history gets everything right. There are things, historical documents, that they might just be stories. They might be novels written in the past. We don't know, but we have a better idea of what certain things are in the archaeology if we have a written record of them. But more importantly, we do not dismiss the historical record because it's not found in archaeology. For instance, the Battle of Thermopylae. That was a famous battle in Greek history where the story of the 300 Spartans defending the pass of Thermopylae against the invading Persian army. Nobody doubted that this battle took place. It is a historical battle. We have many accounts of it. But there is no archaeological evidence of it, or at least there wasn't until fairly recently. They started finding a collection of arrowheads in one section of the Pass of Thermopylae, which supported the historical record stating that the 300 Spartans, or what was left of them, were eventually killed with a shower of arrows. So, without the historical records to verify the archaeology really doesn't mean much. There's a lot of speculation going on. Now, the third point to make is that we simply don't have historical records for ancient America. Unless you're going to accept the Book of Mormon as a true history, which I do, and many people in the church do. But if you're going to discount the Book of Mormon, we really have no, or very few, historical records. And so we have no point of reference for any of the archaeology we're finding. And you say, we talk about like the Hopewell civilization that they talk about in the Ohio Valley. Why is it called the Hopewell? Because a guy named Hopewell is the one that made the first discovery digging up the first mound, I believe. He might have owned it, really. But that's our names for all these ancient peoples come from not the people, but from the people who discovered them, who owned the land, or who first dug it up. We're giving them British names or European names because we don't know what their languages were. We know the people that existed when Europeans first came. That was in the late 1400s and 1500s. We know those people. But what came before that, we really have no clue because there are no written records. Now there used to be, the Aztecs actually, when the Spanish first came over, the Aztecs had a library of like 3,000 records. But the Catholic Church went and destroyed them all because they were the heathen records of an evil people, and so they needed to be destroyed to make way for Christianity. And I believe 3 3 records still exist, and that's it, of the original Aztec library. But without these historical records, we have no point of reference to identify anything. See, we can identify, I mean, they mention the Romans, and we say, well, we can identify this city as being Roman, and this city as being Roman, and this being a Roman construction. We can do that because we have the written records of the Romans. And we have the written records of the people of Europe that came after the Romans, or that were influenced by the Romans, that interacted with the Romans. We have these records. And so we can say, yes, this is a Roman site because because we can compare to the Romans. And we have records of the Romans setting the city up, building the city, therefore we know it's Roman. What we don't have is the records of ancient America. We don't know who did what. There are some written records, but they're very few, and many of them we either can't read or we don't know how to pronounce them. And that's a big thing that people don't realize, is pronouncing words properly makes a big difference. So if we see this, we got no clue how to pronounce this word, and for all anybody knows, this could be the word Zarahemla. Maybe it's the word Nephi. Maybe it's the name Nephi. We don't know because we can't pronounce it. So maybe we have found a record of Nephi, but we wouldn't know it because we have no point of reference. We don't have a Rosetta Stone for the American languages. It just doesn't exist. So, as I say, some languages have been deciphered in that we can read them to a certain extent, but we can't pronounce them, so when we look at a word and we say, well, this word meant hill, we pronounce it as hill. We don't read it in their native language because we can't pronounce it. So when we see a proper name, we don't know how to pronounce it. And because of this language barrier that exists, as I say, there is no point of reference for us to look at the archaeology and state, one way or another, that this is or isn't from the peoples of the Book of Mormon. And that's the biggest thing. So that's the real problem with this issue, is that they're demanding things that archaeology can't actually produce. So the question, when they say there is no archaeological evidence that directly supports the Book of Mormon, what kind of evidence are we looking for? Are we looking for a street sign that says Zarahemla 20 miles? Because if we are, we're not going to find it. Even if we did, we wouldn't know what it was because we couldn't read it. If we're looking for the name of Nephi, again, we're not going to find it. And even if we did, we couldn't read it. We wouldn't know that it was Nephi. And so there are records. Maybe we have found the records, but we don't know, and we can't know. They also mention in there the civilizations of the Aztecs and the Mayans, and then they ask, where are the traces of the Nephites and Lamanites? How did they vanish without a trace? The problem is that they didn't vanish without a trace. The trace, or the evidence of the Lamanites and Nephites, are the Aztecs and the Mayans, as well as the Incas, and everybody else in the North and South America. These are all the descendants of the Nephites and Lamanites. The problem is, again, the language barrier. Not only do we not know how to pronounce these languages, but they would have changed over time. And so even, we get the Mayans, they may be the descendants of the Nephites, but after 1,000 years, they no longer pronounce the language the same. So we look at the modern American languages, take the Mayan language or the Aztec language that existed in the 1400s or 1500s when the Spanish were first encountering the American peoples, the ancient American peoples. What they were saying was likely extremely different than the way it was pronounced during the Book of Mormon time. And all this combines to show us that we're not going to find specifics. We're not going to find a reference to Nephi, or at least we're not going to be able to recognize the reference to Nephi. We're not going to be able to recognize a reference to such things as the Tree of Life vision. Even if we found the city of Zarahemla, we wouldn't know it was the city of Zarahemla because we can't read the languages. And this goes back to what I said in my last video. If you accept the Book of Mormon as a true scripture and true history, then all of this stuff that we do find, this is evidence. We're not looking for the name of Nephi, we're looking for a city. We're looking for many cities. And that's all. Evidence of great civilizations. We don't need anything else, because that's all, we know that that's all the archaeological evidence will ever tell us, unless we can also get a historical record to give us a point of reference. And that historical record to us is the Book of Mormon. But if you don't believe in the Book of Mormon, you have no historical reference, and therefore nothing will ever satisfy you. Archaeology cannot convince, it cannot satisfy the doubts of those who do not believe, and especially if they do not want to believe. But for those who already believe, everything there is evidence of the Book of Mormon. Every people, every city, every ruin, every artifact ever found is evidence of the Book of Mormon. And again, this goes back to those 5 truths that I stated in my first video. Truth number 4, the scriptures are the Word of God, and they are true. And everything else must be based on that. And all of our understanding of the ancient world is based on an acceptance that the scriptures are true, and that they give not only true doctrine and religious theological meaning, but that they give a true history of the world and the peoples they describe. And if you accept that, then archaeology is just one big smorgasbord of evidence. But if you don't accept that, it will never prove anything. And I will leave it there.